On November 19th, over 21 million Malaysians are expected to vote.
Malaysia's Prime Minister Ismail Sabri Yaakob dissolved parliament and called snap elections.
Candidates and their supporters throng nomination centres to contest some of 222 parliamentary seats that are up for grabs.
For the first time, 18 to 20-year-olds casting their ballots.
The largest cohort ever to vote thanks to the efforts of Undi 18, lowering the minimum voting age from 21 to 18. And following the political turmoil that has lingered since the Sheraton Move in 2020,
it's been 24 hours of political turmoil in Malaysia. The government is in limbo with Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad resigning.
Muhyiddin Yassin has bowed to pressure to resign, ending 17 months in power.
many are hoping that this election would bring about a stabler government. The stakes are high, but faith in institutions and politicians are low. So why is it that some people feel like their vote doesn't really matter?
And with just days to go, Malaysia's general election is heating up.
The race is wide open, with no coalition likely to win a simple majority.
Hari mengundi 19 November 2022 hari Sabtu.
First of all, let's address the elephant in the room. Why am I, an Indonesian, explaining how a Malaysian general election works? And the simple answer is, I'm not. While I'm the one doing the explaining, the research for this video was done by Malaysians. In fact, if you want to know more about this topic, we have links to their articles in the description, so check it out if you want to know more about this topic. For now, on to the video. We decided to take a closer look at how elections work, to see how the system really benefits incumbent coalitions and gatekeeps smaller parties out, like PSM, for example. Let's say, out of dissatisfaction with the way things are going, a large grassroots movement decides to form a party. This is how smaller parties like PSM or Muda, for example, are formed. Now, several things stand in their way. Number one is the first past the post system. First past the post is just another way of saying the party with the most votes wins. Now that sounds pretty reasonable, right? Pretty democratic. The party with the most votes wins. Well, if you take a closer look, you can see just how undemocratic the system can get. Let's use an example. Now, let's say 7 parties are contesting for seats in one of Malaysia's many electoral districts. The 7 parties go head-to-head and the final results are these. Now you can clearly see the Onde party has the most votes with 20%, followed by the Cendol party with 18%, and then everybody else. The problem here is that the party that wins only has the approval of 1/5 of the entire population, but will get to rule throughout the end of their term. So, where does this leave the smaller parties? Well, according to Malaysian election law, when failing to secure 1/8 of the total votes in an area, they lose their deposits. Let's take a look at the numbers again. The Rojak Party and the Ooi Kok Hin Party each only managed to secure only 10% of the vote, which means that these candidates have failed to meet the 1/8 threshold, which means they just lost their deposits. At this point, they have 2 options. If they're able to raise enough funds, they can run the next elections. But what if they don't have enough funds? On top of the deposit, running an entire election campaign isn't cheap. Well, there's a second option. Join a coalition with the largest party or the second to largest party and hope to win more seats next time. The Rojak Party takes their 10% and goes with the Onde Party, bringing their numbers up to 30%. And the Ooi Kok Hin Party takes their 10% and goes to the Cendol Party, bringing their numbers up to 28%. See how this works? Over the course of several elections, these two coalitions will only grow stronger, while alternative parties grows weaker. Why? Because when voters see the chances of their own party actually winning grow smaller and smaller, they'll take their vote and either split it between the two existing coalitions, or they'll vote strategically. Either way, these two coalitions just get stronger and stronger. Another problem that we should address is gerrymandering. This is when parties redraw the lines of electoral districts, either to break up the opposing party's supporters into many districts, a practice called cracking, or reduce the value of the opposition's votes by placing them all into one district, a practice called packing. Now, before each election is held, the job of drawing these lines falls to the Electoral Commission, the EC. Now, ideally, the EC would draw these lines impartially and in a way that represents the Malaysian population best. But the Electoral Commission is selected upon the advice of the Prime Minister, meaning the incumbent coalition can just stack the commission full of their own loyalists. Okay, so another thing we actually need to talk about is political cost. What is the political cost of these smaller parties joining larger coalitions? First is loss of autonomy. When parties join coalitions, they have to make compromises. The more influence they want, the more policy proposals they have to give up. And usually, the smaller, less influence your party has, the more you have to give up. Even if a party appeals to their voters by being a new and different voice initially, the system forces them to toe in line with the rest of the mainstream parties. This is why some voters will feel betrayed and lose faith in their new party over the course of several elections. They'll just feel like they're reinforcing the way that things are, even if initially they were voting for a new and radical party with new and radical ideas. Now let's talk about the second phenomena that parties can fall victim to: the minimal winning coalition. Say Rojak wants to join Onde Onde's coalition and bring their 10% over. However, since Onde Onde already has a 2% lead on Cendol's coalition, it doesn't actually have to admit all of Rojak's candidates, just the 9% it needs to gain an edge over the other coalition. So this only happens when a coalition needs to secure seats outside of their normal areas and demographics. Regardless of how willing a new party is to compromise, if the incumbent coalition doesn't need their seat, it won't relent on the power it already has. For example, this happened in the run-up to the 2018 election, where Pakatan Harapan formed a coalition with Parti Pribumi Bersatu Malaysia, PPBM, because it needed more rural Malay voters. But it didn't form a coalition with PSM because it felt confident enough in those areas. So now what? What can be done to fix this? Well, you can introduce certain reforms that incorporate proportional representation, primaries, or local elections. Reforms can also be introduced to ensure that the EC remains impartial and independent. And remember, elections are just one part of the political process. Citizens can still join associations, form advocacy groups, advocate as pressure groups, hold elected officials accountable, or even run for office themselves. Remember, it was through youth advocacy that the Malaysian government lowered the minimum voting age in December 2021 instead of the original proposed date of September 2022. So as important as voting is to the political process, it isn't the only avenue of action available to the people.